this long opening statement that is required. Pursuant to the City of Roanoke Emergency adopted by the RVTPO Policy Board on April 23rd, 2020, and 2020 Virginia General Assembly Legislation H-29 enacted April 24th, 2020. The May meeting of the Roanoke Valley Transportation Planning Organization will be held virtually on Thursday, May 28th, 2020 at 1 p.m. via Zoom. Under the current state of emergency and until further notice, it has been deemed unsafe to assemble a quorum of a public body in one place. Any members of the public may view and participate in the meeting through electronic means. Meeting details are listed on the second page of the agenda. All materials made available to the members will be made available to the public at the same time by posting on the RVARC website. This meeting is being recorded as always. Due to the virtual nature, video and audio will be recorded and provided on the website in place of written minutes. When the state of emergency ends, draft minutes from all of the meetings held during this time will be ratified at the next in-person meeting. As a way of ensuring that our meeting goes smoothly, Tim Thomas, RVARC Outreach and Communication Specialist, and Brian Hill, the RVARC Regional Planner, will serve as the host and co-host for this meeting. All participants are asked to mute themselves to improve audio quality. If any voting policy board member wishes to make a motion, second it, or comment on a motion, please unmute yourself and ask to be recognized by me, the chair. All non-voting members will remain muted. Motions will be written and shared on the screen for all to read before the roll call vote. Comments by citizens will be accepted at the end of the meeting. And with that, I would like to call the meeting to order and ask the secretary for a roll call.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Clinton.
Here.
Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin. Mr. Bespich.
Here.
Mr. Cobb.
Here.
Mr. Fidgelowski.
Here.
Mr. North.
Here.
Mr. Radford.
Present.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Lyles. Ms. Scheid. Mr. King.
Here.
Mr. Price.
Here.
Mr. Bradshaw. Mr. Bradshaw.
He should be with us in a minute.
Okay. Mr. Sonicler.
Presence.
We have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And because of the nature of this meeting, I think we're going to skip introductions. Is that okay, Wayne? Any reason we need to go through that? Do we need to ask for non-voting members to, or are we good with that? We have a good list of who else is present at the meeting?
We have the list here, Tim, correct?
Yes. Madam Chair, we do have one other person that joined by phone with a 3032 number at the end. If we could get their name, then I can add that to the.
That's Benjamin Tripp.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think Tim, as people join us, if people join us late, then you will let us know.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item number 2 on the agenda, and it is the approval of the consent agenda. I would like to request a change to the consent agenda, and item 2C be moved to the end of the agenda, would become agenda item number 8. It is at the request of King from VDOT. He has asked for that to be moved off the consent agenda, and instead of approving a resolution, he will be doing an update, a briefing on the I-81 lighting issue. So with the revised consent agenda, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the amended consent agenda.
Second?
Second.
The second was?
Bradford.
Thank you. All right, item number 3 on the agenda, remarks by the chair.
Madam Chair, we need to have a vote on that. We have a motion and a second.
All those in favor of the revised consent agenda, please say aye. Or do you want a voice?
We have to have a roll call.
I'm sorry, Wayne, you told me that.
Okay, Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Clinton?
Yes.
Mr. Bestfitch?
Yes.
Mr. Cobb? Mr. Cobb?
Mr. Cobb had to leave.
Okay. Mr. Fidgelowski?
Aye.
Mr. North?
Yes.
Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Aye.
Ms. Scheid?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Sonneklaar?
Yes.
It's approved, Madam Chair.
All right, item number 3 on the agenda is remarks by the chair, and there are 2 items under this. And the first one is Celebrate Transportation Day. And I'm going to let Christina maybe take over this.
Yes, Madam Chair, I will show the video.
While Christina is putting this up, I'd like to again thank Wayne and his staff for putting this Celebrate Transportation Day video together. I think it was very well done.
Madam Chair, you may remember last year we were at the Transportation Museum, about 30 of us. It's this year we couldn't do it. I'm sorry.
Even when staying at home is important, having safe and reliable transportation to access life's basic goods and services is essential.
Today, the Roanoke Valley-Alleghany Regional Commission and the Roanoke Valley Transportation Planning Organization celebrate transportation. Our organizations are responsible for planning future improvements to our region's transportation system from the Allegheny Highlands to the Roanoke Valley.
Hello, I'm Mayor Brad Gross, Chair of the Roanoke Valley-Alleghany Regional Commission. Today, on Celebrate Transportation Day, I want to thank everyone in our region who is working hard to keep goods moving and available to our citizens.
Let's celebrate transportation today. Hi, I'm Janet Scheid, Chair of the Roanoke Valley Transportation Planning Organization. Despite the curveballs that life throws at us, we continue to make plans for the future. On this special day, I want to thank our local governments and modal partners, VDOT, DRPT, Valley Metro, Radar, and the Roanoke-Blacksburg Regional Airport for keeping our transportation systems accessible to our citizens.
Whether you're receiving goods at home or going out to get them yourself, we wish our businesses and citizens good health and safety as you move around the Roanoke Valley-Alleghany region.
Second item that I'd like to talk about is appointment of a nominating committee. Elections are coming up. Next month will be my last meeting. My first we will have.
Madam Chair, we can't hear you. Try it again.
Yeah, Wayne?
Maybe you need to get closer to the microphone or something if you can. or yell.
July 1st, we will have a new chair and vice chair. Still can't hear me?
No. Tim, do you know what the problem is?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure unless it has to do with audio settings on her computer, but I don't think anything would have changed.
So, try it again, Madam Chair.
Right, I have appointed a nominating committee.
Right.
A nominating committee, July 1st, we will have a new chair and vice chair. And Jane Johnson and Bill Bestbitch have agreed to serve as a nominating committee. They will be meeting between now and mid-June to come up with a slate of officers to present at our June TPO meeting. If anyone is interested in serving as chair or vice chair, please let Bill or Jane know between now and June 10th. And then they will get together and come up with a slate of officers that will be voted on at our June meeting.
Jane, this is Billy Martin. I just got on. Sorry for being late.
That's okay, Billy. Thank you. All right, any questions about that? All right, number 4 on the agenda is an update on smart scale pre-applications and resolution on 2 Route 460 projects for the TPO submittal. And that is page 64 to 67 on your in your agenda packet. And Mr. Hill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to, before I talk about the specific applications that we're going to seek an endorsement for, I'd like to chat just a brief minute or two about the smart scale pre-applications. And I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you all will see this is a bit of a work in progress, but we're going to go live here in the next several days with an ArcGIS dashboard of the FY22 smart scale pre-applications in the region, and just kind of scroll around here just a little bit and show you the various red, blue, and yellow dots and lines that indicate to the various different pre-applications. We will send out in our minutes and our newsletter and the post on the website these links. And as the smart scale process continues, as these pre-applications then become formal applications that are formally screened in, we will update any and all information relative to it. So just a couple of words about what we've received thus far from our localities and from those applications that we intend to submit on behalf of our localities from the RVTPO. There's a total of 18 pre-applications, 3 from the RVTPO that we anticipate following this action. 3 from Botetourt County, 4 from the city of Roanoke, and 4 from the city of Roanoke County, 3 from Salem, and 1 from Benton. In terms of the activities of these projects, there's a variety, but one of the things that I've observed, and I think as a positive, and I think our VDOT partners will say the same thing, is that these projects we're seeing more projects that are adding innovative intersections, those things like restricted crossing U-turns, roundabouts, and those type things, as well as I guess the bread and butter projects that we still see, which are the bike ped and greenway projects. But we are seeing more of those projects as a result of combined with bike ped and sidewalk activities. So again, this screenshot here is what we've got thus far, in or what we will have. We hope to have. I get a good feel from our folks at VDOT that we're not in danger of having any of our projects screened out. So this should be pretty much what we would expect from the region. So let me now, I guess, change gears a bit and let's talk about the actual two smart scale projects. Let's as many of you all may remember, back at the February meeting, the policy board endorsed firmly endorsed the resubmission of the Orange Avenue 460 improvements project, and then I use the word firmly, and then conditionally endorsed up to a maximum of 3 smart scale projects that could be coming from requests from the city of Roanoke and Roanoke County, and that conditional approval was the way in which it allowed staff to begin development of those pre-applications on or around the 1st of March. The Route 460 Operational Improvement Study, or STARS study, has been ongoing since last year, and the timing of it was such that we weren't able to give specific details on specific projects at that point. Obviously, since that time, the projects have become more concrete, and staff, Roanoke City and Roanoke County, we have coordinated and we did submit 2 pre-applications, which in your staff report you will see, but I will mention those for those that aren't in front of a computer that have access. They were both requested by Roanoke County. The first of which is titled Route 460 at West Ruritan Road Intersection Improvements. The scope here is to construct a through-cut at the intersection of Route 460 and West Ruritan Road to prohibit north and southbound movements to cross Route 460. The movements here will instead make U-turns at Blue Hills Village Drive and Valley Gateway Boulevard. The West Ruritan Road intersection modifications will result in a traffic signal phase reduction. The second project, Route 460 intersection, Route 460 intersections from Carson Road to Hunt Ridge Road. Here the scope is to improve a series of 4 intersections with innovative intersections to include the following: an R-cut or restricted crossing U-turn at Carson Road, Seagull and East Ruritan Road, an R-cut at Country Corner and access changes to Hunt Ridge Road. There's also pedestrian accommodations that would be provided. So as a result of the adoption of the resolution back in February, which did allow for these 460 projects, now staff is formally requesting the policy board to officially endorse these 2 projects through a similar resolution. And for clarification purposes, let me point out that in the staff report, page 65, please ignore that. That was an erroneous addition, and that has no relevance to this agenda. That does, it is germane to the RVARC meeting at 3 p.m. The resolution follows the staff report here, and the action that staff is seeking is endorsement of the 2 requests by Roanoke County for the West Ruritan Road intersection improvements and Route 460 intersections from Carson Road to Hunt Ridge Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Is there a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Radford. Is there any discussion on this resolution or on these items? I have a couple of questions. I'm curious, Brian, if you know what kind of pedestrian accommodations would be maybe included in one of these projects, and why it wouldn't be included in both projects?
Without taking a quick look at and I will admit that during the pre-app phase, there is less information that we're required to provide, but I would defer to Roanoke County staff. They would be able to better give you specifics on those specific improvements.
Hi, Brian, this is Megan Cronice with Roanoke County.
Yes.
Oh, and
Hi, Megan.
thank you. Hi. The applications, the pre-applications were submitted with concepts that the consultants had put together. So pedestrian accommodations are definitely items that we would like to include, but we had not gotten to that point with the pre-application concepts. We're continuing to refine those now, and we anticipate that for the final application, we should have some pedestrian accommodations included. Part of the challenge is the topography along 460 as well. So we're working on it.
But do you intend, Megan, for it to be in both applications or only in one?
It may be, depending upon what we can work out. With the R-cuts, we have learned with another application that we are submitting that the pedestrian crossing of the intersection is a little bit different from the typical straight lines. So it's more of a zigzag across the middle of the intersection, which is a bit atypical. So that's something that we are investigating.
What is the proposed construction date for these?
That all depends upon if they're funded.
Assuming they're funded, what would the proposed construction date be?
Well, the funding, I believe, is available in 2025, 2026. So probably 3 to 4 years out from there.
We're talking about almost 9 or 10 years from now.
That is the challenge with smart scale these days.
Okay. So I guess more of a theoretical question is, at what point do we start seeing, as a result of the pandemic that we're in now and more people working at home, at what point do we start taking into consideration that there may be a lot less cars on the road 9 and 10 years from now?
That's an excellent question for our VDOT friends.
Mr. King, are you there?
I am, Mr. Schneider. I think that is an item that certainly the department has been tracking, the traffic volume trends on our roadways, both interstate as well as primary and secondary. And we've certainly seen a dramatic decrease in traffic volumes. But we are also seeing an uptick now as activities are going a little bit more back to normal and some reopening of certain activities. So I think time will tell. And this is very much a planner's kind of question and a long range planning kind of issue. We certainly are going to, I think we expect to see a shift in retail commercial space, such that you may have even fewer folks making the trip downtown to the standard office complex high-rise building, and a greater utilization of telework type arrangements now that there has been a proof of concept, if you will, or a test proof that many of these functions can be performed well in a telework fashion. So I think we'll see a shift in landscape, and it'll be interesting to track this to determine, where do we see that change in traffic volumes. We saw not a big change in truck volumes on the interstate, for instance, and that probably is reflective of the supply chain needs of moving commerce, but we did see a larger change in what would be typical commuter traffic, as you might expect. So very early to tell at this stage of the game, but we certainly expect a change in patterns, certainly over the course of between now and when a vaccine might become about. But even beyond the vaccine, I think we've seen a proof of the functionality of remote work that will likely change the pattern of commuting and business enterprise. So don't know that fully answers your question, but it's certainly going to be interesting to watch.
Thank you. There's not an answer to my question. It's more of a philosophical statement of, I do think we need to be cognizant of the fact that I think traffic is going to change, and I agree with what you've said. I think the office, the office space, the people driving downtown or into Roanoke County to go to offices is going to change. People have seen that this works, and at some point in time, we're going to need to analyze that and take it into consideration when we look at road improvements and future funding for these road improvements. So thank you. I wasn't looking for an answer, more just a discussion of something thinking about. All right, if there's no other discussion, we have a motion and a second. And so I would ask for a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bestpitch,
Aye.
Mr. Cobb. Mr. Cobb has stepped out for a little while. Mr. Fizilowski,
Aye.
Mr. North,
Aye.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
and Ms. Johnson has stepped out as well. Ms. Scheid? Ms. Scheid? Ken King, Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw? Mr. Bradshaw, I saw he came in. Mr. Bradshaw? Mr. Sonaker?
Yes.
Motion passes, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I'd like to quickly ask if there was a number that entered the room, if that person could identify themselves, the number ending 8288. For purposes of the vote, we wanted to ensure that we didn't miss anyone.
And that's Michael Gray, not a voter.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you, Tim. Item number 5 on the agenda is review of draft 2021 to 2024 Transportation Improvement Program. It is page 78 through 79 in your agenda, attachment 1. Mr. Hill again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if you will bear with me, I'm going to share the screen just for just a moment again. And I wanted to, before I get into the meat, if you will, of this item, the chair had asked staff to discuss a bit about changes in revenues and the changes in perhaps the projects might have as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're going to chat just a second, if you will, with a couple of slides just to discuss that. I believe Christina will have a companion discussion with one of her items as well. Well, having just a bit of trouble here, but if you all can see my part of my screen, we'll move forward. This comes directly from what you're seeing here, and I don't expect anyone to really be able to see it, but this comes directly from our financial plan that's found in the long-range transportation plan. And in the blue boxes at the top are a variety of different revenues and from that feed to project to funding the various projects that we're all accustomed to applying for and receiving, and those revenues range from the state taxes for motor vehicles, the gas taxes, license fees, that sort of thing, and we're finding that on the next slide here that here are some of the effects on those state revenues. $37 million in motor vehicle sales, a decrease in April of this year, which is, as you can tell, almost nearing half of the decrease from the same time period last year. Now, we talk about how the gas tax will increase 5 cents a gallon for the next 2 years. That's based on Secretary Lane's estimates in April, $700 million decrease in state revenues. That's we don't feel, and the state doesn't feel, that that's going to offset much at all. In fact, one of the other bullets indicates that they're estimating revenues to decrease by $1 billion by June 30th. As you might imagine, gas taxes and license fees fell in April. One of the things to kind of keep in mind is that confidence, public and consumer confidence, is really key in the reopening of both the state and the country as a whole. One thing I observed, one of the funding sources is insurance premium tax revenues. And many of you probably have experienced or seen or read about various insurance companies providing anything from waivers of premiums for certain months to credits to anything else. So that's something that could have an effect on revenues as well. And then the last slide I wanted to show was just how we think that how we really have seen that COVID-19 affects the transportation system. We've seen the airport can tell us in some dire details about the reductions in air travel and highway travel, business travel, where a lot of folks are virtually handling business or reducing their project loads as a result of not being able to be on the ground and in person handling specific work tasks. The sharp decline in trips by older Americans as they have been, lots have been targeted as at risk to COVID-19. Shifts, however, in transportation modes can really be a positive thing in terms of more people biking, more people purchasing bikes, more people walking. So that has positive effects on congestion and air quality improvement. So those are some things to think of, and I Christina and or our partners at VDOT may have more information, but staff is anticipating more concrete information on revenues and projections and from VDOT and the state on how really serious the issues could be in terms of revenues. We hope for a rosier picture, but we shall see. So let me get back to the issue at hand, the item at hand, if you will.
Brian, if I can interject a minute, can you spend a moment to talk about how those shifts in revenue affect what we do? I mean, it directly affects our grants, correct?
Well, it would, I assume, and Ken, please correct me if I'm wrong. I would say that perhaps it could affect it could affect definitely the start times of various projects. It could affect how projects that are slower than others to complete certain phases. There could be reobligations of funds. There could be changes in timelines that were accepted timelines for certain grant cycles that we're normally accustomed to. I mean, we might see guidance, and we might see information come from the CTB that says, well, we were thinking that Smart Scale had X funding, but now it is X minus Y. Those sorts of things. And Ken, if I'm speaking out of school, please correct me.
Madam Chair, I can address somewhat that question. in that your statement's is right. It will be in the first impacts you'll see would likely be in the future allocation. So it would be in the next round of smart scale or in the next round of other types of funding programs, which are putting in place monies in the quote out years, further out into the future. The exact impact of which is still being measured and assessed by our leadership, financial leadership within the department, as well as with the Commonwealth overall, to try to understand the revenue impacts that have occurred, and then project those across the future months that lie ahead, and then from that begin to develop strategies. Usually the strategy is to try to avoid impacting projects that are in motion in terms of either development, design, or construction. You want to try to, once you've started those activities, it is very counterproductive to try to stop and restart those types of activities. You're better to try to fund those projects that are already in motion, and then absorb where possible on projects that are still in the programming and planning type phase. So I think the way Brian described it's correct. You would see it manifest itself in a drawdown of funds for future programmed projects and activities.
Thank you, Mr. King. Something everyone needs to be aware of, so I appreciate you bringing it up, Brian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So let's talk about the draft FY21 to 24 Transportation Improvement Program, and this is our first reading, if you will, of this. And for those members that this is the first time that they're seeing or working with a TIP, essentially think of the TIP as a transportation capital improvement program. So it includes a list of transportation projects that only receive federal funds that are only from the Roanoke urbanized area in the fiscal years of 21, 22, 23, and 24. And it talks about the priorities that the region has in terms of what's in the constrained long-range multimodal transportation plan, our long-range plan, and then how we are making progress toward achieving those various different targets that we've talked about before with regard to everything from transit asset management to pavement, bridges, and safety. So back in April, we held a 15-day public comment period that consisted of an online survey, and 53 folks answered this survey, and those results are included here in the staff report and follow this staff report. Some of this feedback is relevant to both the TTC and the policy board, and the members were asked to review citizens' input in the TIP and consider any changes that might be needed to be made to the TIP at the time. The responses, unfortunately, were lacking from certain zip codes and minority populations. And then a second public input opportunity was going to be available in June prior to our anticipated public hearing and adoption of the TIP at the June meeting. So some of the things that this TIP document, the 21 to 24 TIP, includes is a list of grouped and ungrouped projects to be implemented in the 21 to 24 time period. Explanations of that distinction of what a grouped and an ungrouped project is. We've added project status as of March 20 for all the grouped and ungrouped projects. That status essentially is, we've added a couple different categories, not started, and for projects that are statewide and district-wide that have a rolling start and finish, an NA for not applicable. But essentially they're the phases that everyone's usually familiar with, and that is preliminary engineering, right-of-way acquisition, if applicable, and then construction. We talk a bit about the RVTPO's Transportation Improvement Program Amendment and Adjustment process. What comes before this board in terms of an amendment and triggers the public participation process, and those that are handled administratively. The RVTPO's STBG and TA funding processes and related documents that are now will be included in the appendices. Smart scale projects that have no federal funding, and there is an other projects category that we feel is important to include, but for purposes of meeting the federal requirements, it does not have, it might have revenue sharing, state and local, and no federal funding. Public input survey results, we talked about that a minute ago, and then we removed from the previous tip what we call the basic guide to the Transportation Improvement Program, and we'll include that on the website at a future date. The first review of the tip for the TTC was at their May 14th meeting, and then the second or action item will be at the June 11th TTC meeting, where they will consider the recommendation to the tip. So there's no action for the policy board at this meeting. We wanted to give you all a first look, and that you would see and hold a public hearing on the 25th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. So this was a review of the draft TIP. It will come up again at our next meeting. Are there any questions or any discussion about this draft TIP? All right, hearing none, we will move on. Item number 6 on the agenda is adoption of a resolution approving the FY21 Unified Planning Work Program. And this is page 80 to 81 and attachment 2 in your agenda package. Mrs.
Thank you, Chair Scheid. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty with my computer, so I've called in on the phone as well. So hopefully everyone can hear me okay, and I'll get my computer resolved here shortly. But yes, we have for you today a resolution regarding the FY21 Unified Planning Work Program. We have a number of items that are included in the work program, including many ongoing items, such as developing our 2045 long-range plan, completing the update to the congestion management process, and reviewing the public participation plan for updates. And we also have a lot of new items, including updating the TED study, which the board requested earlier this year, assisting Vinton with a bypass road corridor study, and Roanoke County with a Dixie Caverns transportation and land use study, and then updating the bikeway plan, which was last done in 2012. So these are just some of the highlights, but there are a number of other items that are just routine ongoing items that we're engaged with. And we are looking for the board's consideration of the resolution and adoption of the work program.
All right, so I would ask for a motion to adopt the resolution and the Unified Work Program.
Ms. Scheid, it's Billy Martin. I'll make a motion to that effect.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Radford. Is there any discussion, questions before we take a vote? Hearing none? Mr. Bestbich, was that a question? No? Okay.
Madam Chair, for purposes of voting, I would like to note that Mr. Cobb has rejoined the meeting.
Thank you. And are we putting the motion up on the screen? Did I wait?
I think she was trying to get her. There you go.
Okay. Motion was by
Mr. Martin.
second by Mr. Radford. All right. Hearing no discussion, I would ask for a roll call vote on this item.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Aye.
Mr. Cobb,
Aye.
Mr. Fidgelowski,
Aye.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson. Not sure if Ms. Johnson's back yet. Right. Ms. Scheid,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Sonnecker.
Yes.
Motion approved, Madam Chair.
All right, item number 7 on our agenda is the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. And I would ask Mrs. Finch to take it from here.
Thank you, Chair Scheid, and good afternoon, everybody. This item asks the board to prioritize the best use of transportation funds available through the STBG program. This year, more requests for STBG funds have been made than can be accommodated. These requests include covering cost overruns on 4 current projects, paying for all or part of 19 new projects, 14 of which were submitted in the fall during the application cycle, 5 of which were out-of-cycle requests submitted recently. As Brian mentioned during his presentation on the Transportation Improvement Program, major sources of transportation funding, like vehicle sales and gas tax, have not been generating the money for transportation improvements at the levels estimated prior to the pandemic, because people haven't been traveling as much nor buying gas or vehicles at previous rates. We have not yet received information about how STBG or any other funding programs will be impacted. STBG funds have received less funds than expected in the past, sometimes, and the same is likely in the future due to current and ongoing events. This is why the board's prioritization of projects is particularly important. The board last allocated STBG funds in June of 2019. A timeline of activity related to STBG was provided in the staff report to remind you of how we've arrived at the content provided for today's meeting. 4 of the projects funded previously have since come back and requested additional money, totaling more than $2.4 million to cover cost overruns. The STBG procedures address how cost overruns may be handled, including scaling back the project, using local smart scale or STBG funds, or dropping the project altogether. The TTC has reviewed these 4 requests and has recommended using STBG funds to preserve and complete the projects. The STBG procedures do not address public input for existing projects requesting more funds, so no input has been solicited on these requests. If the board agrees that these projects are a priority for STBG fund use, a resolution to adjust the FY20 through 25 STBG financial plan is provided in the agenda packet. And this is the first item under STBG. I guess now it's on item 8A. To go through what item 8B is, item 8B addresses the requests to fund 19 new projects. The 5 out-of-cycle requests are being made due to urgent unforeseen circumstances that prevented them from being submitted during the regular application cycle. Namely, that the Route 460 Operations Improvement Study has recently released recommendations for 460. These 5 projects are pursuing smart scale funding, and the project sponsors would like STBG funds to minimize the requested smart scale amount, hopefully putting the project in a better position to obtain smart scale funding. These out-of-cycle projects have not gone through the scoring and prioritization process by the technical committee that the other 14 projects went through, nor has the public been asked for input. public input on the 14 other projects was provided in the staff report. Roanoke County has suggested that the board consider the use of estimated FY27 funds to conditionally support the out-of-cycle requests. The board wouldn't normally take action on FY27 funds until next spring, after we have received the estimated fund available from VDOT and after preliminary smart scale results are made known. Each of these 19 projects requesting STBG funds has taken a different approach. Unlike smart scale, which fully funds projects through construction, STBG funds may be used to fund a portion or all of a project with either full commitment from the board to provide the funds or to conditionally provide a portion of the funds contingent upon the project successfully securing the remaining funds needed. The board has been asked to consider a number of factors related to priorities, funding availability, and to what extent the board is financially committed to projects. So the decisions that the board is being asked to make today, there were 4 listed in your agenda packet. Let me bring them up on the screen now. So the first item would be consideration of the priorities. If you're supportive of funding the cost overruns for the 4 projects that have requested funds, please consider approval of the resolution that was included in the agenda packet to adjust the FY20 through 25 STBG financial plan. And then the 4 items related to item 8B are to prioritize the candidate and out of cycle project requests, indicate a preferred scenario strategy for development of the FY21 through 26 STBG financial plan, indicate a preference to allocate FY27 funds, 27 funds ahead of schedule, and then determine if public input should be sought on the out of cycle requests. That would be a possibility. Should you just choose to do that, we could put in the newspaper ads that are going to be going out next week, and then you'll have those results for your June meeting. So those are the items. It's a lot, and I'm happy to take any questions or proceed with a motion as the board's ready.
All right. Could we put the first question back up on the screen, Christina, which has to do with the additional STBG funds for the 4 projects, just to make sure everyone, because we're going to take these bit by bit.
Okay. Let me shift screens here. That up for you. Okay, so these are the existing projects.
So these are the existing projects that are reducing their funding, and then below it are the existing projects that are requesting additional funding. So those projects are the Roanoke River Greenway, Green Hill Park to Riverside Park, Bigger Creek Trail Extension, Wallen Avenue, bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, and the I-581 Exit 2 interchange study. So do we have a motion and a second to approve the additional STBG funds for these 4 projects. If no one wants to make a motion to approve the funding for these 4 projects.
I'll make a motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Knorr.
I'll second.
And I believe that's
I'll
Mr.
second the motion.
Was it Mr. Fitzgerald?
Yep.
All right, now that we have a motion and a second, is there any discussion of this adjustment to the FY 2020-25 Surface Transportation Block Grant Financial Plan? Hearing none, we will ask for a roll call vote on this item.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bestpitch,
Aye.
Mr. Cobb,
Aye.
Mr. Vigilowski,
Aye.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Scheid,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Sonicolor.
Yes.
Motion passes, Madam Chair.
Mr. Secretary. All right. There we go. Thank you. All right, the next question has to do with the out-of-cycle project requests. Christine, I'm assuming that we should take these one by one. I mean, not the projects, but each of these 4 questions one by one.
Yes, so the way that I've set it up on the screen here, for the first item, prioritizing the candidate and out-of-cycle project requests, I have a column here that I can put in the numbers for the priorities. And then for the second one, indicating a preferred scenario strategy for development, I've only included the TTC's recommended scenario with the out-of-cycle projects for 460. This is what the TTC had recommended, but there were the other scenarios that Chair Scheid, you had asked be included in the staff report. So those other options are also in the staff report, and I can bring those up if you'd like to see those, but it was too much to include in this one page. Then the third one is, and the fourth one, those are just simple yes or no's, but the big questions are definitely 1 and 2.
So I guess, do you need us to go down through each one of these items and put a priority on it? Is that what you're looking for?
Now it's really important that the board consider the technical committee's input, the scoring exercise that they did with the ranking, and then the public's input on the priorities. So if the board could provide that direction to staff and to the technical committee, we can then work at the TTC's June meeting to develop the draft FY 21 through 26 STBG financial plan, and then bring that back at a public hearing in June for the board to review and consider for approval.
Christina, didn't the TTC prioritize these and give us a recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Martin. Here on the screen, you can see how the TTC technical ranking, the scoring exercise, how that came out. After discussions, the TTC decided that the 2 Vinton projects should be swapped in priority, so that you can see in the next column. So Gus Nix Boulevard went from a 13 in the ranking exercise to a number 8. And then the Glade Creek Greenway Phase 3 went from an 8 in the ranking exercise to a 13. That was based off of Vinton's feedback that they would prefer, if they had to choose between 2, that they would prefer the Gus Nix Boulevard be prioritized higher. And then the last column there is the feedback that we got from the public comment survey. So the last column there shows the public's priorities. And so we're asking for the board to consider all of that information, which is a lot, and provide us with your priorities so that we can continue with the financial plan development.
So in other words, if we want to change the priorities, we tell you now. If not, we can just make a motion to approve.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Questions before we ask for a motion? Does everyone understand what we're being asked to do?
Madam Chair, this is Cody.
Yes.
I did notice that Mr. Cobb had asked a question in the chat about how many from the public participated in the ranking. Could staff provide any additional information on that?
Cody, I just answered it in the chat, but I've been told that
we had 18 citizens complete the survey.
How many, Christina?
18 citizens provided input, which led to that public priority list, and then 13 TTC members. There are 18 members on the TTC, and 13 of those provided input on that side.
But their recommendations were included in the ranking here on how the TTC ranked these. I mean, they took those comments into consideration?
No, sir. The public input was not part of the TTC's ranking or prioritization. So that was a separate effort, parallel effort.
So why did we ask them for input then?
Because we haven't had that information at a time when action was needed from the TTC. They made these priorities earlier this year, and at that time we didn't have the public input. It has been noted, though, that it would be helpful to get public input earlier in the process, and so we will look to do that in the future for STBG rounds.
Okay, all right. That clears it up a little bit for me. Well, with no questions, I'll just make a motion that we accept the TTC's recommendation with what they've presented. Would that be in order to do that, Madam Chair?
Yes, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
And is there any discussion or questions at this time concerning the TTC ranking that
Madam
we are
Chair, I have a
proposing?
question as I get down to the out-of-cycle project requests. How do those fit in line with the 14 that the TTC had reviewed? These ones had not been ranked.
Have not been ranked. Well, is it appropriate at this point to ask that those go back to the that those go to the TTC to be ranked as a part of this process?
Honestly, we don't have enough time between now and next month when you're going to be approving the FY21 through 26 financial plan. If these projects are to be included in that financial plan, then it would be important to get that direction from the board now. The TTC process of scoring and ranking is a quite timely one, and we have to get the agenda packet out next week.
Could we make a note and put it into the minutes that that's something we need to do next year to give the public consideration on input?
At an earlier point in time?
Yes, ma'am. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Martin. So Mr. Martin, are you suggesting at this point that these out-of-cycle requests, the last 5 on your screen, be the next 5 in the terms of the ranking, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19?
That would be acceptable to me if it's okay with everybody else.
I'm agreeable.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second, I believe.
We do.
None? No other discussion? I would ask for a roll call vote on this.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Aye.
Mr. Cobb,
Yes.
Mr. Fidgelowski,
Aye.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Scheid,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw.
Mr. Bradshaw had to step out for another meeting. I apologize.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Mr. Sonnecar,
Yes.
motion passes, Madam Chair.
All right, the third item we need to consider is indicate a preference to allocate FY27 funds ahead of schedule. Christina, can you just talk a little bit and refresh our memories of what exactly this entails?
Yes, would you like to go to number 3 before number 2?
Oh, I'm sorry.
We need to do the indicated preferred scenario strategy for development of FY21 through 26 financial plan.
Let's go to number 2.
Okay, so number 2 entails this last column, and in the staff report, I described the different commitment levels, whether the board is fully committed, and that means that the project has some money in it, not all, in the previous or first 2 years of the financial plan. Whether it's conditionally committed, which means that there's money in years 3 through 6 of the financial plan, and that conditional commitment is contingent upon that project being fully funded through other sources, particularly Smart Scale. And then the TTC had also developed a hybrid commitment concept, which would commit some of the money to a project and then conditionally commit another part of the money to the project. So I can use the Route 220 Super Street and Access Management project as an example. Valley-Alleghany County had requested $924,000. That would support preliminary engineering and right-of-way, and the TTC had recommended that the project be given $3 million, where a portion of that $3 million would be fully committed to the project, and then a portion of that money would be conditionally committed, contingent upon the 220 Super Street project being successful through the Smart Scale project. So the way the hybrid commitment works, if the project is successful in Smart Scale, then the $3 million goes to the project and it moves along. If for whatever reason there are project overruns, as we saw earlier today, the project may come back to STBG for additional support. Now that would be the board's decision in the future to award those funds or not, but that would be a benefit of having some money committed to that project. If the project is not successful in Smart Scale, that $924,000 is still committed to the project, and Valley-Alleghany County would need to figure out how to come up with $5+ million to fully fund that project, and that could potentially come as a request through STBG. That's to be determined if the project is unsuccessful in Smart Scale, but at a minimum, there would be some money committed to that project. And so there are 4 projects that the TTC has recommended be considered for this new hybrid commitment. Route 220 Super Street and Access Management Project, the Route 419 Streetscape Improvements Phase 2 project. So those two would get more money than they had requested. And then two others, the Aviation Drive, Valley View Boulevard pedestrian improvements, and the Valley Point Parkway realignment project would get less than they had requested. And all of those projects have smart scale applications initiated and are intending to fully submit those projects later this summer. And so what we're looking for here is, how does the board feel about allocating money committed, conditionally committed, a hybrid? What does that mean for the project or the board's potential future commitments to that project? And then is the board in agreement with giving some of these projects more money than they had requested?
All right, thank you, Mrs. Finch. Are there questions?
Madam Chair, just for clarification, we're looking at the priority 3 on this vote for using FY27 funds. Is that correct?
That will be after. So first looking at number 2, indicated preferred scenario strategy. So yeah.
So the question is, if I misspeak, Mrs. Finch, please feel free to correct me. We have in the past talked about committed funds and conditionally committed funds. The TTC has come up with a new strategy of a hybrid commitment of funds that you can see on the screen in front of you. In some cases, they have, through this hybrid commitment, given the project considerably more money than was asked for. That would be in project number 2 and project number 4, and significantly less than was asked for in project number 6 and project number 7. And I will remind folks that we do have STBG procedures that have been adopted by this board, and those procedures do not have any leeway in them for a hybrid commitment. So this is going outside of our STBG procedures.
And I'll also note, Chair Scheid, that the scenario I had put up here does have the 5 out-of-cycle projects here. And the question relates to the development of the FY21 through 26 financial plan. There was a suggestion by Roanoke County that those 5 out-of-cycle projects be considered for FY27 funds and not FY21 through 26 funds. So that's something else for the board to consider.
Madam Chair, that's correct. We're asking for 2027 funding on those 5 out-of-cycle projects.
That's question number 3 on our action list, isn't it, Christina? Is that
yes?
Okay, so if we stick with question number 2, are you looking for us to indicate whether or not we want to accept a hybrid commitment? Or I guess I'm still struggling with what exactly it is you're looking for us to vote on.
Yes, there are a number of questions here. So is the board interested in pursuing a hybrid commitment status? So committing to some funds and then conditionally committing to other funds for some of these projects. And then are you interested in giving a project more money than what was requested or less money in some cases? And then are you interested in only looking at the candidate projects that were submitted in the fall for the development of the FY21 financial plan and leaving the out-of-cycle projects to the next round, which is FY27 development? So primarily those 3 questions will help provide a lot of guidance as the TTC develops the financial plan.
Is there any discussion?
I like the hybrid for what it's worth, if we can do it.
Okay, any other comments?
If we go out of cycle like this, now is this going to mess anything up down the road?
The only consideration that I would share is the discussion that we've had today about how much money will actually be available in the coming years. These were estimates that were based prior to the pandemic. And so the priorities will help us adjust the financial plan as we move forward, if decreases are needed or if projects need to come off. So.
And Madam Chair, just also to point out, it's my understanding that any of these projects, should funding not be available, or for example, a smart scale application not pass muster, that the earmarked funds in the out years will simply go back for reallocation.
I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean by that, Mr. North. Christina, can you shed any light on that? I mean, my understanding is that those projects would have to come back to the TPO for additional funds.
Right. For example, the Route 220 Super Street Nexus Management Project, if through the financial plan development next month, $924,000 was placed in an early year to get preliminary engineering started, that money would become committed. The remaining $2+ million, if the board chose to allocate $3 million to that project, would be conditionally committed in an out year, contingent upon the project receiving the remaining $3 or $4 million that it needs to actually go to construction through Smart Scale. And so if the project is successful, then that $2+ million in an out year would be committed to the project. If the project is not successful in Smart Scale, then that money would come back to the STBG program for reallocation to another project. Or potentially to the same project if the project then is looking for the remaining $3 or $4 million to come out of the STBG program.
Right,
Madam Chair, if I could ask, yes, Madam Chair, if I could ask, you had mentioned that the hybrid commitment is outside of our STBG policy rules. It sounds to me like it's a good idea, but if it's outside of the rules that we've set, do we have to go back and now change those policy rules?
I would suggest that that would be appropriate. I mean, that if we want to accept the notion of the hybrid commitment, then the procedures should be modified to recognize that.
Well, I think Steve's got a good point there. Do we want to do that and go outside of the rules that we have? If we don't, we're going to have to go back and change it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Madam Chair, this is Bill Vespich. So is the reason why we're being asked to approve this today with some recommendations that don't really conform with our adopted procedures, is that because of some deadlines that we will miss otherwise if we wait until we have an opportunity to amend the procedures and then go back to this? And I guess that's probably a question for Christina.
Yes, it is.
Mr. Vespich, in particular for the projects that are pursuing Smart Scale funds, that application deadline is at the beginning of August. And so those projects need to know the board's STBG commitment prior to their submittal. And normally we would have been asking you to take action no later than this month so that these projects could get incorporated into the 6-year improvement program for the CTB. That has been delayed, and really this is the TPO's decision, so you can take as much time as you need to with it. But for the purposes of Smart Scale, we would definitely want to have action from you no later than the July meeting, if there's one.
So we could just hold this over until our June meeting and then have the discussion first about what our current procedures require and what amendments we might want to consider, correct?
Correct? Christina? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention that we did spend last year going through the STBG procedures and creating them so that they could help guide this process so that we wouldn't have to be changing the rules, so to speak, while we're playing the game. But as you start playing the game, you start to realize that there are some aspects of it that you may not like or that you think could be done better. And so that's where the technical committee has taken some of that perspective and tried to make some adjustments. So that's what they've been recommending. So it's really up to the board how you want to proceed. It is tricky to change the rules while you're playing the game.
So am I correct that we do not currently have a motion on the floor regarding item number 2 on this list?
We don't, Bill.
Yeah, well, my suggestion would be that we don't make a motion on this, but we put this back on the agenda for the June meeting and deal with it then. I understand what you're saying about what the work we did last year and changing the rules, but that's exactly what we're being asked to do. Change the rules in the middle of the game without having that discussion as a separate matter on the agenda.
And Mr. Bestfitch, I'll just mention that the scenario that I have on the screen right now is the TTC's recommended scenario, which includes giving more money or the hybrid commitment, which is not included in the STBG procedures. There were other scenarios that better match the rules that were included in the staff report if you'd prefer to look at those. In particular, scenario 1, which looks at funding projects as requested or less, and then scenario 1 with the 460 projects. Would you like to see those?
Yes.
Okay, let me switch over. Can you see that on the screen?
Yes.
So scenario 1 looks at funding the projects as they had requested the money, so not increasing it. It does look at giving some projects less than they had requested, trying to accommodate more projects and giving them an opportunity to find the rest of the money through Smart Scale. And it only looks at committing money to projects or conditionally committing money to projects. So if those projects are not successful in Smart Scale, there is no commitment on the board to continue to fund it or consider funding for it. It's either a all in or not type game. So if the board would prefer something like scenario 1, I can take that back to the TTC and work with them on creating the FY21 through 26 financial plan based off of scenario 1, which doesn't go outside of the procedures the way the recommended scenario does.
Madam Chairman, this is Cody, if I may speak.
Yes.
Let's see if I can get my video to work. I apologize. I just wanted to point out that, talked a lot about in the TTC meeting of, looking at ways to sort of maximize our opportunities in Smart Scale. When we look around the state and other regions, we're seeing folks and who are coming up with innovative and sort of new ways to sort of I don't want to say game the system, but try to maximize their efforts from Smart Scale by leveraging local and regional money with the state money. So it was not the TTC's intent to, flaunt the rules in any kind of malicious manner, but it was just looking at ways to give you all options to better maximize this money to leverage for Smart Scale and to leverage building these larger projects. And we all know that Smart Scale is hard to predict, but we were just trying to give you all options for that. And we understand fully that the rules and procedures were developed over a long period of time with lots of input. And I think that does have value in many ways. What we also understand is, as we've just sort of looked at that changing world of Smart Scale through each cycle, that finding ways to use the regional money to leverage state money for projects is just becoming more important as part of playing that statewide game, if you will. So I just wanted to point that out, that we were looking for ways to give you all flexible options, since at the end of the day, you have the option to change the rules, ignore the rules, do what you will at y'all's discretion. So I'm happy to hear that you all are willing to, at least as Mr. Bespich said, have that conversation in some way. And we were just looking at ways to give you all options that may not have even come before us when we were developing the policies and procedures. So just trying a little innovative thinking in that way. And as you all will consider with the FY27 money, looking at ways to try to preserve some of those 460 projects, since all the timelines didn't align. So like I said, I just wanted to make sure that you all know that we were working to give you all some flexibility with y'all's decision-making power.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
This is Lee. I don't have a vote on this, but have been involved with it for many years. And some of you have been around when I was doing that are going to be quite shocked to hear me say this. But while I think rules are extremely important, and I have on occasion in the past cited our variation from procedures as a caveat for not doing things or for thinking carefully, I also don't think we should be a slave to rules, which we, as we've just heard, we're going to be hard put to have our rules always put us in the best position to do what needs to be done. And so when I look at this, and I have to confess, I'm not sure what the difference between a hybrid commitment to also support CN and a conditional commitment, and but this scenario one, which supposedly is within the rules, still contains a hybrid commitment, which I understood was not part of our procedures. But I think we should do what puts us in the best position to be successful in the other process that that is also been changing over time. And from our last experience, it took how long, Christina, to change the rules? A year and a half, roughly. And I don't think, I mean, if this is something that could be done in 1 month or 2 months, and the staff is prepared to say, yes, we can tweak the rules, you can adopt it and then feel comfortable. But if we're telling the staff to do that, then it made just as much sense to take the action that we think is appropriate and then ask them to adjust the rules to accommodate the action we just took. So that's my input for what it's worth.
Chair?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Osborne, but I will make one correction. I do not see a hybrid commitment in scenario one as requested or less.
Is that what's on the screen? I didn't put this on the screen.
No, I know. I'm just saying the scenario one.
You don't see number 2 under TTC recommended scenario? But you're saying over here in this whole column here. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm misreading what's put on the board. Okay. I apologize. I'm misreading how this is laid out. Right. Okay. I withdraw that comment. Thank you.
And someone else was trying to speak, and I'm not sure.
Madam Chair, I remember at some point we want to look again at the TED study. as we've said in the past, a number of the projects that are being recommended doesn't fit with the TED study, the projects that were recommended to have the TED study, and we need to take another look at that and be more expansive, or at least relook at that whole thing. And that could be part of the process of looking at the rules and procedures again, how we want to address the TED study.
Madam Chair, if I may add to what Mr. Strickland just commented on, there is a policy in the STBG procedures regarding the TED study, and the board has already indicated back in January, February that you are willing to be flexible with that policy. And originally that policy stated that only TED study projects were eligible for conditional commitment. So the board has already granted flexibility to allow other projects, and some of those are reflected here, to also apply for conditional commitment status.
Right, so what is the pleasure of this group? I don't know a simple way to resolve this.
Well, Madam Chair, I'd like a little more time to think about this and review this, but if we have to have it done today, I think the TTC has presented this to give us more flexibility in this committee. And I'm going to make a motion to accept the TTC's recommendation. Now, I know it's probably be a lot of people here that may not agree with it. If you don't, please say so. But we could sit here and beat this horse to death all day. But I think we need to make a decision one way or the other, either accept it or not accept it, and just move right along. Just my feelings.
Madam Chair, I second that motion.
Madam Chair, may I ask for clarification? Are we saying the TTC recommended scenario with the 460 projects, everything in that column is what we're being asked to vote on?
Or the previous column?
Or the previous one. Mr. Martin, were you talking about the TTC recommended scenario with 460 projects?
Yes.
Okay.
And is that what you're seconding, Mr. North?
Yes, I'm seconding that motion, including the 460 projects.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there comment, discussion, questions?
Madam Chair, my only additional comment is perhaps we can resolve all of this at our next meeting even by simply adding a section at the end of our existing procedures saying that notwithstanding any of these procedures, the board may approve other approaches as the rules change, as the situation changes, state funding changes or whatever, and that's not very well worded, but you know what I'm saying, that just to put that flexibility at the end and saying as the landscape changes, we do have the ability to be flexible.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bestfitch. Any other discussion? There's a motion and a second. Are we putting it up on the screen? I just want to make sure everyone knows what we're voting on.
I think this would be more fun than a regular meeting, don't you?
Oh, a lot more fun, Billy.
Madam Chair, this is Steve Clinton. Back to Mr. Bestfitch's comment. Were you offering that as an amendment, Mr. Bestfitch, or just as a comment for consideration?
No, sir. That was just a comment for consideration. I don't think I don't feel like I'm at the point anyway of feeling like we're ready to actually amend the motion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Martin, a second by Mr. North to proceed with the TTC recommended scenario that includes 460 projects and includes the hybrid commitment to those projects.
And this is Steve Clinton again. So we're sure that this does have standing, even though it's outside of our normal procedures and our rules.
Yes, I believe that's correct. Mr. Strickland, can you speak to that?
Well, the bottom line is that your procedures and rules, that they're there for you to guide you. But as the board of directors of this organization, you have the right to adjust it when the need arises. If you have an opportunity and you want to take that opportunity, you can override the guidelines.
And if we would do that following this action, like at next month's meeting, would we have to revise our rules?
Well, at some point, Mr. Clinton, we really do need to look at the rules. There are lots of things, as Mrs. Finch mentioned, about the TED study. A lot of projects they don't fit into that requirement. So we might want to take another look at the procedures sometime down the road. And what Mr. Bespich said is true. The board needs to be as flexible as it can be based on future constraints and funding and so forth. So I think you have the right to do that and make the best decision that you can for the organization and for the community.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we are ready for a roll call vote, Mr. Strickland.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Clinton.
Yes.
Mr. Martin.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bespich.
Aye.
Mr. Cobb.
Aye.
Well, the thing is.
Mr. Fizulowski.
Aye.
Mr. North.
Yes.
Mr. Radford.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson. I guess Jane didn't make it back. Ms. Scheid.
Yes.
Mr. King.
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
I think Mr. Bradshaw's went to another meeting. And Mr. Sonneckler. We have the motion passes.
Okay, I'll talk to you later. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, the third item on this is to indicate a preference to allocate FY27 funds ahead of schedule. And so this would be a yes or no. Christina, you want to expand on that a little bit again?
So normally the board would be allocating FY27 funds next spring, after which we would know the results of the smart scale scoring. And then we would also know what the estimated amount for FY27 is. The idea to allocate FY27 funds now was brought up at a previous meeting, thinking that the board could consider using that estimated funds, and we assume FY26 funds would be what FY27 funds would be, and that those funds could be used to apply towards the smart scale applications. And so this is just looking for if the board would like to consider a resolution to use FY27 funds ahead of schedule, and most likely we would use anything that wouldn't fit within your action that you just took, the TTC recommended scenario with the 460 projects, and then consider using FY27 funds for that purpose.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Why would we do that? Why would we allocate FY27 funds now instead of next year? What's the advantage to that?
The advantage to doing that now would be to support those smart scale applications. The thinking is that if you're not asking for the full project cost in smart scale, but asking for a portion of it, in this case 80% for the out of cycle projects, that you might have a better chance of getting your smart scale request granted.
It's a long ways off in the future and a lot of uncertainty between now and then.
Who recommended this?
This was a recommendation that came from Roanoke County.
Roanoke County, and with the support of Roanoke City, so that we can increase our leverage and scoring on smart scale applications.
And I'll just mention, Chair Scheid, that with the previous action to proceed with the CPC recommended scenario with 460 projects for the FY21 through 26 financial plan, because some of the projects, as noted here on the screen, would be receiving more money than they had requested. Giving more money to some of those higher priority projects within that FY21 through 26 timeframe would probably leave out some of those lower priority projects, those out of cycle projects that are seeking funds to support their smart scale applications. So without dipping into FY27 funds, some of those lower priority projects probably won't get to them in FY21 through 26 based on the available funds.
I think that's the consequence of doing this.
Madam Chair, this is Cody again. I have a question for staff.
Go ahead.
So in light of the action just taken by the board on number 2, number 3 is also technically outside of the current policies and procedures, correct?
It is.
So, but in light of the action of number 2, the board would also be in line for, doing this preference to allocate FY27 funds ahead of schedule, essentially in the same spirit of which they made the decision on number 2, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
If I may, I would move that the board approve the allocation of FY27 funds ahead of schedule.
Steve Clinton, I second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion of this?
Just for, can I ask a question for clarification? When we adopted the motion under number 2, which included those funds for the 460, within the 21 to 26 category, does that mean that there is funding in 26 for the 460 projects?
We haven't done all of the math yet, but I believe there is some money available in the FY21 through 26 timeframe to accommodate some of the out of cycle requests.
Okay,
some portion of it, I don't know how much.
So what we're voting on is not really fiscally constrained in the way we normally see this, where we've got columns that have each year and you can map out and show each project and the total of what is projected for that year or to be received.
No, that this is just the strategy for how to develop that financial plan. So taking the information that you provide today, we'll take that back and work with the TTC at their June meeting to come up with that financial plan. And we'll have a public hearing at the June meeting for you to approve that.
Okay. So this is really direction and guidance for staff to move forward.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Roanoke County supports the use of FY27 funds ahead of schedule on the basis of previous discussions that we've had, as these 460 projects in the city and county, and as well as Bonitot, are regional projects that help the whole area with transportation. They're designed for improvement of safety. They're also designed for improvement of fluidity. And quite frankly, we hope that the use of the 27 funds will improve the leverage when these applications are filed with Smart Scale. And for that reason, Roanoke County supports this proposal for 27 funds.
Madam Chair, just a clarification question. Because this is listed as conditional, is it correct, my understanding correct, that these funds would be, these funds, if they ended up being FY27 funds, they would only be committed in the case upon which the project was awarded Smart Scale funds, and then these funds would be used to advance that project accordingly. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct. Is that correct, Ms. Finch?
Yes, that's correct.
That which actually is exactly what the strategy is trying to achieve. And so therefore you're not allocating, or the board wouldn't be allocating any additional FY27 funds other than in a situation through which you're able to leverage that money to increase it to the benefit of the TPO. So I think that's a relevant point. I just wanted to make sure I fully understood that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. Are there any other questions or discussion? about this? Does everyone understand the motion? No questions? All right. I think we are ready to take a roll call vote, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Aye.
Mr. Cobb, Mr. Fizilowski,
Aye.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Scheid,
No.
no. Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw, Mr. Sonaker.
Yes.
Okay, resolution or the motion passes.
Mr. Strickland. All right, I think we have one more item to take up, and that is to determine if public input should be sought on the out-of-cycle requests. Are any questions of staff on this before we ask for a motion in a second? All right, I would ask for a motion.
Madam Chair, I would make a motion that we say yes on this. We do, if we're going to do this, we do need to have transparency. So I'll make a motion that public input should be sought on the out-of-cycle request.
Madam Chair, I'll make a second to that motion.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion on this item? We have a motion.
Would that be after the staff has done this analysis to determine actually whether the funds are there? Or are we just talking about doing this to get a input on the project itself?
This would be input on the project itself.
So when would this happen, Mrs. Finch?
The public comment period would begin at the end of next week.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Osborne?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. We have a motion by Mr. Martin and a second by Mr. North. If there are no other questions, then we will ask for a roll call. Mr. Strickland?
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Aye.
Mr. Cobb, Mr. Fizilowski,
Aye.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Ms. Scheid,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw, Mr. Sonaker.
Yes.
Yeah, the motion passes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, we are approaching 3 o'clock, and so my question to Wayne is, do we have to, and maybe to Mr. King, is do we have time to do the update on the I-81 lighting? Does Regional Commission begin at 3 o'clock?
Yes, ma'am, and we'd like to put, start it up a little, 5 minutes or 7 minutes early so people can jump in.
All right, so is Mr. King, are you okay with putting this off for another month?
I can certainly we can push it off a month. I can also give a quick 2-minute update if you would like me to do so.
Let's go ahead and put it off for a month. And that way we will have a little bit more time. I think it is an important issue, and we'll have a little bit more time to discuss it. So I appreciate that.
Very good.
Any other business to come before the TPO this month? Are there any comments from policy board members and or the public at this time?
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Mr. Martin, is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
Staff for helping us through
Aye.
it. I appreciate your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you. You did good today.
Bye.
Hey, better than we did at the board meeting the other night. We had a 12